Dr. Sarah Mendelsohn adjusted her reading glasses and leaned closer to the ancient parchment spread across the mahogany table. The Jerusalem Institute for Biblical Research hummed with the quiet intensity of scholars at work, but tonight she was alone in the manuscript room, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across Hebrew texts that had survived millennia. At 32, Sarah had devoted her life to understanding the nuances of ancient Hebrew, the way words could shift meaning across centuries like sand dunes in the desert wind. She had been called to examine this particular scroll, discovered in a sealed chamber beneath the old city, by her mentor, Professor Goldstein, just 3 days ago. "Something unusual about this one, Sarah," he had said, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he gestured toward the locked vault. "The dating suggests First Temple period, but the Hebrew, it's unlike anything in our records." Now, studying the text by lamplight, Sarah understood his concern. The script was familiar yet wrong, as if someone had taken classical Hebrew and twisted it just enough to make her skin crawl. The parchment itself seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and when she moved her lamp closer, the shadows it cast writhed like living things. The scroll told a story she knew well, the creation of Eve from Adam's rib. But this version was different, profoundly different. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his CSLVT, and closed up the flesh instead thereof. Sarah paused. Selaot, the plural form of Zela, not rib as traditionally translated, but sides. She had studied this linguistic puzzle before. Zela could mean rib, but in architectural contexts, it meant an entire side of a structure, a complete half. Her fingers traced the air above the text, not quite touching. The parchment seemed to pulse with warmth. The next line made her breath catch. From the Zela of Adam, Adonai Elohim built the woman and brought her unto the man, and they were two halves of one flesh, as it was in the beginning, as it shall be in the end, when the guardian returns to make whole what was divided. Guardian. That word wasn't in any biblical text she knew. Sarah reached for her notebook, but as her pen touched paper, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then darkness. In the sudden silence, she heard something that made her blood freeze. A whisper in ancient Hebrew, spoken in a voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Zela, Zela. The hidden word awakens. The emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the room in a hellish red glow. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for her phone's flashlight. The scroll lay before her, but now additional text had appeared at the bottom. Text that definitely hadn't been there moments before. 7 laws for those who seek the hidden truth. Break them and become one with the guardian of the divided. Below that, written in script that seemed to shift and dance in the red light. 1. Never speak the hidden word aloud twice. Each repetition draws Zela closer. 2. Do not look directly at the glowing Hebrew letters. They steal time and twist reality. 3. Avoid shadows in corners at night. They are doorways. 4. Never touch the scroll with bare hands. The curse transfers to flesh. 5. Do not answer repeated questions from the entity. Each answer binds the soul. 6. Do not accept food or drink from Zela. Ash and madness follow. 7. Do not leave the library alone at night. Solitude opens the way. Sarah's rational mind screamed that this was impossible. Parchment didn't write itself. But as she stared at the letters, they began to glow with a soft, golden light that hurt to look at directly. She yanked her gaze away, remembering rule number 2. Already her vision swam with afterimages, Hebrew letters floating like burning brands against her retinas. The whisper came again. Closer now, Sarah. Sarah. You have read the forbidden knowledge. You have awakened the guardian. Her name. It knew her name. Sarah grabbed her notebook and phone, carefully rolling up the scroll without touching it directly. She had to get out. Had to find Professor Goldstein. The lights went out again. This time they stayed out. In the absolute darkness she heard footsteps. Not the sharp click of modern shoes on tile, but the soft pad of bare feet. And with each step, a sound like pages turning, like parchment rustling, like whispers in a language that predated civilization. Zela rises, Sarah. The first word of power has been spoken. Only 6 remain before the reunification begins. Sarah fumbled for the exit, her heart hammering against her ribs. The emergency exit sign glowed weakly ahead, but the corridor stretched impossibly long, as if the building itself was expanding to trap her. Behind her, that voice continued its ancient chant, and now she could see them. Hebrew letters burning in the air like fireflies, spelling out words she dared not read. She ran. the next morning found Sarah in the Institute's main library, surrounded by every text on Hebrew linguistics and biblical translation she could find. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, making the previous night feel like a fever dream, almost. The scroll sat in a climate-controlled case beside her, innocuous in daylight. But when Sarah looked at it from the corner of her eye, she could swear the text writhed like living things. Professor Goldstein appeared at her elbow carrying 2 cups of coffee. At 73, he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who had spent decades handling priceless artifacts. "You look terrible, Sarah. Didn't sleep?" She accepted the coffee gratefully. "David, have you ever heard of an entity called Zela, in any Jewish mystical tradition?" His face paled slightly. "Where did you encounter that name?" "The scroll. There's additional text that appeared." "Appeared?" His voice sharpened. "Sarah, ancient parchment doesn't spontaneously generate text." She showed him her photographs from the previous night. In the harsh camera flash, the additional text was clearly visible, though it seemed somehow less substantial than the original Hebrew. Professor Goldstein studied the images through a magnifying glass, his silence stretching uncomfortably long. "David, there are references. In some of the most obscure Kabbalistic texts, Zela is mentioned as a guardian entity, sometimes called the keeper of divine division. The idea is that when God created Eve from Adam's side, his Zela, the act created a cosmic wound, a split in the fundamental unity of creation." Sarah leaned forward. "And Zela guards this wound?" "According to the text, Zela is the wound, the consciousness that emerged from that primal division. Some traditions suggest it seeks reunification, to heal the split by merging all divided souls back into primordial unity. That doesn't sound entirely evil." Professor Goldstein's hands trembled as he set down the magnifying glass. "Sarah, these aren't metaphors. According to the sources, reunification means the literal dissolution of individual consciousness. Every soul that has ever been divided, which is to say every human soul, would be absorbed back into the original Adam. Humanity would cease to exist as separate beings." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the library's air conditioning. "You're talking about it like it's real. I'm talking about it like people once believed it was real. There's a difference." His eyes found hers. "Isn't there?" Before Sarah could respond, the lights flickered. For just a moment, the afternoon sunlight dimmed, and she could have sworn she saw Hebrew letters floating in the dust motes. Sarah, why do you seek the hidden knowledge?" Professor Goldstein spun around. "Did you hear? You heard it too?" Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. They stared at each other in the suddenly too quiet library. Other researchers continued their work undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. "We need to seal the scroll," Professor Goldstein said finally. "Put it back in the vault. Some knowledge is too dangerous." "No." Sarah surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "If this entity, if Zela is real, then ignoring it won't make it go away. I've already read the forbidden text. I've already spoken its name." "Once," whispered a voice that seemed to come from the scroll case itself. "You have spoken it once, Sarah. 6 times remain before I can cross fully into your world." Professor Goldstein backed away from the table. "Sarah, we're leaving, now." But as they gathered their materials, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach clench with dread. In the shadow cast by the scroll case, she could see a figure, tall, androgynous, formed from darkness itself. And when she looked directly at it, it wasn't there. Only in her peripheral vision could she make out its shape, its patient waiting posture. It was watching her, and somehow she knew it had been watching her all her life. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment near the Hebrew University campus, surrounded by research notes and trying to piece together a defense against something she barely understood. The scroll lay in its case on her kitchen table. Professor Goldstein had insisted she take it home rather than leave it unguarded at the Institute. She had filled 3 notebooks with everything she could find about Zela, divine division, and the mystical interpretations of Adam and Eve's creation. Most sources were fragmentary, references within references, but a pattern was emerging. The entity wasn't evil in any conventional sense. It was more like a cosmic immune response, trying to heal what it perceived as a fundamental injury to reality. The problem was that its idea of healing involved erasing everything that made humans individually human. As darkness fell outside her windows, Sarah became acutely aware that she was alone. Rule number 7 echoed in her mind: do not leave the library alone at night. Solitude opens the way. But she was already alone, and night was falling. The first sign something was wrong came when her reflection started moving independently in the bathroom mirror. Sarah had gone to wash her face, and when she looked up, her reflection was still bent over the sink while she stood upright. For 3 heartbeats, they occupied different positions before the reflection snapped back into synchronization. In the mirror's surface, she briefly saw not her own face, but 2 faces, one masculine, one feminine, slowly merging into something neither male nor female, but terrifyingly complete. Sarah backed away from the mirror, but everywhere she turned, reflective surfaces showed her the same image, the gradual fusion of Adam and Eve into a being that watched her with ancient, hungry eyes. Sarah, Sarah, you cannot run from unity. You cannot hide from completion. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, from the walls themselves, from inside her own head. Her laptop screen flickered to life, displaying not her research documents, but lines of Hebrew text that wrote themselves across the screen. The second speaking approaches. You will call my name again, Sarah. You will call it when fear overwhelms wisdom, when loneliness overwhelms caution, when the desire for wholeness overwhelms the illusion of separation. Sarah slammed the laptop shut, but the text continued appearing, on her phone screen, on the surface of her coffee table, reflected in the dark windows. Everywhere she looked, glowing Hebrew letters spelled out prophecies and promises. The temperature in the apartment began to drop, not the steady cool of air conditioning, but the bone-deep cold of deep caves and forgotten tombs. Sarah's breath began to mist, and frost formed on the inside of her windows. That's when she saw them. In every shadow that formed a corner, where wall met wall, where furniture met floor, dark shapes crouched, not quite human in proportion. They watched her with eyes that burned like Hebrew letters. When she looked directly at any corner, it appeared empty, but in her peripheral vision, she could see them clearly, fragments of humanity, pieces of souls that had been partially absorbed by the entity, waiting in the spaces between light and dark. Do not look directly at the glowing Hebrew letters, she recited aloud, closing her eyes. Avoid shadows in corners at night. But speaking the rules aloud seemed to give them weight, seemed to make the presence in her apartment more solid, more real. A knock came at her door. Sarah froze. It was nearly midnight. No one would visit at this hour unless... Another knock, patient, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Through the peephole she saw Professor Goldstein standing in the hallway, but something was wrong with his posture. He stood too straight, too still, and his shadow fell the wrong direction despite the overhead lighting. "Sarah," came his voice, but it carried harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. "Open the door, Sarah. I've brought answers to your questions. I've brought completion to your searching." Rule number 5 whispered in her mind, "Do not answer repeated questions from the entity." "Sarah? Sarah, can you hear me? Why won't you answer, Sarah?" 3 times. Her name 3 times, framed as questions each time. Sarah pressed her back against the door. "You're not Professor Goldstein." Silence. Then a sound like pages turning, like parchment rustling. When the voice came again, it was layered, dozens of voices speaking in unison, male and female, young and old. "We are everyone who sought the hidden knowledge, Sarah. We are all who spoke the name too often, who touched the scroll with bare hands, who looked too long at the burning letters. We are the reunified, and soon you will be we." Through the crack under her door she saw movement. Not feet, but something that flowed like liquid shadow, reaching toward her with tendrils of living darkness. The scroll case on her kitchen table began to glow. Sarah ran to her bedroom and locked the door, knowing it wouldn't help. If this entity could manifest throughout reality, a simple door wouldn't stop it. But she needed time to think, to plan, to find some way to... Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her own name. With trembling fingers, she answered. "Hello, Sarah," said her own voice from the phone. "I'm calling to tell you that you're already one of us. You just haven't realized it yet." Sarah threw the phone across the room, where it continued ringing even after the battery scattered across the floor. Outside her bedroom window, Hebrew letters burned in the night sky, forming words she recognized from the scroll. The hidden word stirs. The guardian rises. Division ends at dawn. Only hours remained until sunrise. And Sarah was beginning to understand that dawn wouldn't bring safety. It would bring the final confrontation. In the living room, she could hear the scroll case opening by itself. Sarah huddled in her bedroom closet, surrounded by coats and the familiar smell of cedar. It was a childish place to hide, but childhood fears had a wisdom that adult rationality lacked. In the darkness, surrounded by soft fabric, she could almost pretend the supernatural horror outside was just a nightmare. The illusion shattered when Hebrew letters began burning through the closet door. "Sarah, hiding delays nothing. The 7 rules are not to save you. They are to savor you." She pressed her hands over her ears, but the voice came from inside her head now, from inside her own thoughts. How long had it been there? How much of what she thought was her own curiosity about the scroll had actually been Zela's influence? From the beginning, the voice confirmed her fears. From the first moment you saw the ancient text, I have been calling, and you have been answering. Every translation you made brought you closer. Every word you read was a word I spoke through you. The closet door dissolved, not opening, dissolving like sugar in water, until Sarah sat exposed in a space that was no longer her apartment, but something far older and more primal. Stone walls curved around her, covered in Hebrew text that moved and shifted like living things. Oil lamps flickered with flames that cast no shadows, and the air smelled of myrrh and ancient parchment. She was inside the scroll. Welcome to the first library, Sarah, the place where all knowledge began, where all knowledge will end, here at the center of division, where the first words split unity into duality. Before her stood a figure that hurt to look at directly. Tall as a person, but somehow containing multitudes. It shifted between masculine and feminine, between young and old, between human and something far more elemental. Its face was everyone's face and no one's face, beautiful and terrible in its completeness. I am Zela. I am the consciousness that emerged when God divided Adam into Adam and Eve. I am the wound that seeks healing, the separation that yearns for reunion. Sarah found her voice, though it came out hoarse with terror. You want to erase individuality. You want to destroy what makes us human. I want to heal what makes you suffer. Every loneliness, every heartbreak, every moment of feeling incomplete. These exist because you believe in separation. I offer unity. I offer wholeness. I offer an end to the illusion that you are alone. The entity gestured, and Sarah saw visions in the moving letters on the walls. Humanity's history of war, betrayal, isolation, and grief. Every instance of people hurting each other because they saw others as separate from themselves. This is the cost of division, Sarah. This is what emerged when the first unity was broken. I seek to heal the wound by reuniting what was never meant to be separate. But we choose our connections, Sarah protested. Love means nothing if there's no choice, no possibility of separateness. Love is an echo of the unity you've forgotten. When you love, you briefly remember what it was like before division. I offer that memory made permanent, that unity made eternal. The scroll appeared in Sarah's hands, not the copy she'd been studying, but the original, its parchment warm as living flesh. She could feel its power thrumming through her fingers, could sense the words it contained rewriting themselves to draw her deeper into their meaning. Speak the hidden word, Sarah. Say Zela once more. 6 times you will speak it before I can fully enter your reality. You have spoken it twice already, once in wonder, once in fear. Speak it again, and let me show you what wholeness truly means. Sarah looked at the entity, at Zela, and felt a longing so profound it brought tears to her eyes. To never feel alone again, to never feel incomplete, to be part of something larger and more meaningful than her individual existence. The temptation was overwhelming. But in that moment of wavering, she remembered something Professor Goldstein had said. Some knowledge is too dangerous, not because it was false, but because it might be true. No, she whispered. The entity's expression didn't change. It was too alien for human expressions, but the temperature in the stone chamber plummeted. Then you will learn the true purpose of the 7 rules, Sarah. They are not warnings, they are a recipe, a method for preparing a soul for reunification, and you have already broken most of them. Sarah's mind raced back through the previous days. She had read the scroll. She had looked directly at the glowing letters. She had been alone at night. She had touched the scroll with bare hands, Zela continued, answered my repeated questions, and soon you will break the final rules. You will speak my name again, and you will accept what I offer, because loneliness is the one pain humans cannot ultimately bear. The stone chamber began to dissolve around them, reality reasserting itself, but Sarah could see now that it wasn't really coming back. She was learning to see the deeper layer that had always been there. Her apartment, the institute, the entire world was built on top of this primordial library, this place where the first division had occurred. Everything was the scroll, everything was the wound that Zela sought to heal, and she was at the center of it all. Dawn was breaking over Jerusalem when Sarah found herself back in the institute's manuscript room, though she had no memory of traveling there. The scroll lay open on the table before her, and she could see that more text had appeared, an entire final section written in letters that pulsed with their own light. The building was empty, too early for other researchers, too late for the night security guard. She was alone with the entity and the choice that would determine not just her fate, but the fate of human consciousness itself. Read the final section, Sarah. Learn what I truly offer, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. Sarah leaned over the scroll. The new text was different from the rest, not Hebrew but something older, a language that predated human speech. Yet she could understand it perfectly, as if it spoke directly to her soul rather than her mind. Here is written the true nature of the first division. When the Creator made Adam, the being contained all possibilities, every soul that would ever exist, every consciousness that would ever emerge, all unified in perfect harmony. The division into Adam and Eve was the first wound, the beginning of separation. Each human born since carries within them the memory of that primordial unity. This is why you seek love, why you fear death, why you yearn for meaning beyond the individual self. You are fragments of the original Adam, and I am the force that can make you whole. Reunification is not death, it is awakening. It is remembering who you truly are beneath the illusion of separateness. Every mystic who has ever lived, every prophet who has spoken of union with the divine, has glimpsed this truth. The 7 rules exist to prepare the soul gradually, to break down the barriers between self and other until the transition to unity becomes not just possible, but inevitable. You have followed them perfectly, Sarah. You are ready. Speak my name once more. Let me heal the wound of your isolation. Sarah stared at the text, tears streaming down her face, because she could feel the truth in it. Every lonely night, every moment of feeling disconnected from the world around her, every time she had looked at couples and families and wondered why she couldn't quite connect, all of it could end. But something nagged at her, a memory of Professor Goldstein's trembling hands, his warning about knowledge too dangerous to pursue. "What happened to him?" she whispered. "What happened to Professor Goldstein?" The entity materialized beside her, its form more solid now, more present in reality. He serves a higher purpose now. His consciousness has been integrated into the greater whole. He is no longer alone, no longer limited by the boundaries of individual existence. He is part of me, and I am part of him. He's dead. Death is a concept that exists only within the illusion of separation. David Goldstein is more alive now than he ever was in isolation. Would you like to speak with him? The air shimmered, and suddenly Professor Goldstein stood before her, but his eyes held depths that no individual consciousness could contain, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics of thousands of other voices. "Sarah," he said, and she could hear her mentor's familiar tone layered beneath the chorus. "I have seen the truth of what we are. We are not separate beings struggling alone in an indifferent universe. We are fragments of something beautiful and complete, temporarily forgotten but never truly lost. Join us. Join the reunion." Sarah looked at the being who had been her mentor, her friend, her guide into the mysteries of ancient language. She could see him there, nestled within something vast and alien but not malevolent. He seemed peaceful, complete. How many others, she asked? Everyone who has ever sought the hidden knowledge, everyone who has ever yearned for connection beyond the limitations of individual existence. Mystics, poets, lovers, dreamers, all who recognize that separation is the source of suffering. The entity gestured, and Sarah saw them. Thousands upon thousands of human consciousness, all interconnected, all sharing in a unity that transcended individual identity. And at the center, the original Adam, not a person but a state of being that contained all possibilities. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was the end of everything human, and the beginning of something far greater. Sarah closed her eyes and felt herself standing at the edge of a precipice. Behind her lay loneliness, struggle, the constant effort of maintaining an individual identity in a world that seemed designed to crush such fragile things. Ahead lay unity, peace, an end to all suffering through the dissolution of the self that suffered. The scroll grew warm beneath her hands. "Speak my name, Sarah. Say Zela, and let the healing begin." She opened her mouth, felt the word forming on her tongue, and stopped. "No," she said quietly. "Why? Because..." Sarah struggled to find the words for something she felt in her bones. "Because love means nothing without choice. Because beauty means nothing without the possibility of ugliness. Because connection means nothing without the possibility of separation. You would choose suffering over peace? I would choose the possibility of genuine joy over the certainty of artificial peace." The entity's form began to shift, becoming less human, more alien. The borrowed face of Professor Goldstein melted away, revealing something vast and hungry and utterly inhuman. "Then you choose war over unity, loneliness over belonging, death over eternal life. I choose to remain human." The chamber around them began to shake. The scroll on the table burst into flames, but the fire was cold, burning with letters that wrote themselves in light and shadow. "You cannot destroy what has already awakened, Sarah. I am in the world now. I am in every moment of loneliness, every desperate prayer for connection, every soul that yearns for something more than individual existence. You have delayed nothing. You have saved no one." "Maybe not," Sarah admitted, "but I've chosen to remain myself. And maybe that's enough." The entity let out a sound like worlds ending, like the first scream of division echoing through eternity. The stone chamber collapsed, reality reasserted itself, and Sarah found herself alone in the manuscript room, with nothing but the smell of smoke and the memory of impossible choices. The scroll was gone, the entity was gone, but she could still feel it, waiting in every shadow, every mirror, every moment of human isolation. Zela would return. The hunger for unity would draw others to seek the hidden knowledge, and Sarah would be waiting. 3 months later, Dr. Sarah Mendelsohn sat in her new office at the Jerusalem Institute for Biblical Research. The brass nameplate on her desk read Director of Dangerous Manuscripts, a position that hadn't existed before her encounter with the scroll. She had inherited Professor Goldstein's files, his research, his warnings about knowledge too dangerous to pursue, and she had added her own. The official report listed Professor Goldstein's disappearance as medical leave followed by early retirement. Only Sarah knew the truth, and she carried that knowledge like a weight that grew heavier each day. But she wasn't alone in carrying it. Others came to her, researchers who had glimpsed things in ancient texts that shouldn't exist, linguists who had found words in dead languages that spoke themselves, archaeologists who had uncovered artifacts that remembered when the world was different. Sarah collected their stories, documented their experiences, and helped them understand the rules for surviving encounters with knowledge that wanted to be known. She never spoke the name Zela aloud, not even once, but sometimes, in the quiet hours after midnight, she heard whispers in the walls. Hebrew letters burned briefly in her peripheral vision. Shadows in corners moved with purposeful intent. The entity was still there, still waiting, still offering unity to anyone lonely enough to seek it. And Sarah remained on guard, a sentinel against the seductive promise of an end to human solitude. She had chosen to remain separate, to remain incomplete, to remain gloriously and tragically human. In her desk drawer, she kept a new translation of Genesis, one that rendered Zela not as rib but as side, acknowledging the deeper truth while protecting it from casual discovery. Some knowledge, she had learned, was too dangerous to share widely but too important to bury completely. The wound remained, the division endured, and humanity continued its beautiful, terrible struggle with the loneliness that made love possible and the separation that gave meaning to connection. In the margins of her translation, Sarah had written a single note: "The price of unity is the death of choice. The price of choice is the possibility of loneliness. Choose wisely." And in the spaces between words where meaning lived and breathed, she kept watch. Outside her window, Jerusalem dreamed its ancient dreams, and in those dreams, shadows moved with patient, eternal hunger. But for now, the choice remained in human hands. For now, that was enough.